Most people think they're just going to know when they're ready to retire. Like, at some point they'll hit a number, maybe some target balance that they've been shooting for in their accounts. And then once they get there, they'll just kind of feel it, that they'll just know that they're ready. But here's what I see happen more often than not is that when someone hits that number, the one that they thought they needed, then they move that number. And so in this video, I want to walk you through 3 signs that tell you that you're actually ready. And none of these, by the way, has anything to do with a certain dollar amount. Look, retirement's a big deal. You don't want to mess it up. But what I find is that a lot of people who think that they're not ready, they actually are. They just never connected the dots between what they have and what that actually means for their life. And by the way, if we haven't met yet, I'm Ryan Kravitz. I'm a certified financial planner professional, and I help people transition into and through retirement. So sign number 1 here is that you know where your paycheck comes from. Now, not your net worth, but your paycheck. So starting the month after you retire, what money actually lands in your checking account? Where does it come from? Which account? In what order? Most people, even people with a lot saved, can't really answer that. They've got a 401k, maybe an IRA, some money in a brokerage account, maybe a Roth, right? And the plan is just to kind of, hey, we'll just kind of pull from our accounts as we go, as we need money and such. But that's not really a plan. You need to know how much you can actually afford to take out each month without putting the plan at risk. Which accounts are you going to pull from first? And how do you do it in a way that doesn't create, unnecessary taxes along the way? I mean, that's what helps turn the pile into a paycheck, because right now the paycheck just shows up when you're working, right? It's easy. You don't think about it. It's just there. But the day that you retire, I mean, obviously that stops. And now this pile of money that you've been spending, maybe 30 or 40 years in some cases, it's a long time building this money up. Well, now at this point, this has to become income. And now spending this is a very different feeling. And I think this is actually why a lot of people keep working longer than they actually have to. I mean, it's not because the math says that they have to. It's just because stopping feels like a bigger risk than it actually is. So the sign isn't hitting some arbitrary number that you set in your head. That the sign is about being able to say, okay, here's how much we can comfortably spend each month. Here's where that money comes from. And here's how we're going to be smart about our withdrawal strategy and taxes along the way. Having a real answer or a specific answer instead of just kind of some vague ideas. Because when you can do that, one of the biggest reasons that people delay retirement just kind of goes away. And if you're trying to figure this out for your own retirement, I'll show you how to take the next step at the end of this video. Sign number 2 here is that you know what a bad year actually means for your spending. Now, knowing where the paycheck comes from, I mean, that's a huge piece of it, no doubt about it. But here's another question that I believe is just as important. And that's, what happens to your spending if the market has a rough year, especially early in retirement? Because here's what I see happen more often than not is that someone retires, and maybe everything's going fine. Maybe the market's been going up pretty nicely for some time, and then they retire, and then the market drops. And even if they have, cash set aside, even if the plan is actually still intact, they freeze. They stop spending. They cancel the trip. They put off the home project. And it's not because the plan says that they have to, but because they don't know what the drop actually means for them specifically. And that's the key word here is specifically, because certainly a market drop doesn't automatically mean that your portfolio dropped by the same amount, right? And even if your portfolio did drop, that doesn't automatically mean that you need to reduce spending. It depends on how much it dropped, your withdrawal rate, your other income sources, how the rest of your plan is structured. So the question isn't just what if the market has a bad year? The question is, if your portfolio dropped, then you know at what point that you'd actually need to adjust your spending. And then how much would you need to reduce your spending by? And is that something that you could realistically live with? Because when you know those answers ahead of time, then a bad year stops being something that shakes your confidence. We all know the markets in your portfolio are going to have their ups and downs, but the thing here is that you know what that means for you, if anything. And you also know what it doesn't mean. And having that clarity is really what lets you keep living your retirement and spending on the things that matter and enjoying yourself instead of freezing up every time the market moves. And that's really what sign number 2 is all about. It's not about eliminating risk. I mean, that's not realistic. It's all about knowing what that risk actually means for you and having that clarity, which helps to give you confidence to spend and such. So let's move on to sign number 3, which is that you've given yourself permission to spend. Now, I know this one sounds less financial, but this one's a big deal because a lot of people are really good savers. I mean, a lot of people have spent 30 or 40 years putting money away and living below their means and not touching their accounts and all of this, right? And really that discipline is exactly why they're in such a good spot. But when retirement comes, now they have to do the opposite. And that switch is really hard for a lot of people. I mean, I've seen people with more than enough saved genuinely get stressed out about a $5,000 trip. And it's not because the trip would hurt them financially. I mean, it wouldn't. It was really just because spending feels wrong. They built that muscle for decades now. And now all of a sudden they're just supposed to flip it off. Go from a saver to now be a spender. And from the outside, it looks responsible. It's, they're just being careful. But sometimes careful and afraid look the same. And they're not the same thing because underspending is really its own problem. I mean, if you've sacrificed and saved your whole life, saving and investing, for retirement someday, and now you're there, but now you're too anxious to actually live it, then that's not a win. I mean, the goal is never to die with the biggest account balances. For most people, it's to have a good life, to maybe travel while you're healthy or help family if that matters to you, to do the things that you kept saying that you do someday. But a lot of that becomes harder if you can't bring yourself to spend the money. So the sign here is that you know how much you can spend. It's not a guess. It's a real number that's been checked against everything else. And you can actually spend it without feeling like you're doing something wrong. And what I find is that permission usually doesn't come from having more. Because if you don't feel okay at $1.5 million, then there's a decent chance that you're not going to feel okay at $2 million either. Now, the numbers here I'm saying are all relative to you. Everyone's different. Your expenses, the lifestyle that you want. I mean, really all of that. And so let me give you just a quick example of what this looks like in practice. So say we've got John and Jane. He's 63, she's 61. And let's say they have $2 million saved and that their house is paid off and then they have Social Security there when they want it to. Now, their monthly expenses are reasonable and they support the lifestyle that they want. Not extravagant, just a life that they've been working towards. And this is pretty typical of what I see, is that on paper, they might look fine, but they're convinced that they need maybe 2 or 3 more years before they can retire. So we'd go through all of these 3 things here together. So first we'd figure out what they could actually spend each month. And then we'd map out where that money comes from, which accounts, in what order, and how to be smart about taxes along the way. Then we'd stress test the plan. What happens if the market has a rough stretch early on? Would they need to adjust spending? And if so, by how much? And if things go better than expected, then when would they actually have the green light to spend more? And what I find is that when people can see those answers, then retirement doesn't feel like a leap anymore. So if you're watching this and you're wondering whether you're ready, then ask yourself these 3 questions. Number 1 is, do you know how much you can comfortably spend each month and where that money is actually coming from? Number 2 is, do you know what a bad year would actually mean for your spending? And at what point, if any, would you need to adjust? And number 3 is, have you actually given yourself permission to spend? If you can answer those 3 questions, then you might be a lot closer than you think. And if you can't yet, Well, that's not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, all it means is that there's work to do. If you've got the savings, or maybe if you just think you might have the savings, but you're still not sure how to turn it into a plan that you can actually feel confident in, that's exactly the kind of work that I do with people. Click the link in the description to learn more and also to get started. Or if you're watching on a TV, then scan the QR code that's on the screen. I want to thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.